castles blue. Turn my walls to sand just to see you. I'll give you anything. I'll give you anything. I'll give you anything.
November 23rd, 2019 marks the 20-year anniversary of the release of Third Eye Blind's sophomore album, Blue, a follow-up to their highly successful self-titled debut that came out 2.5 years earlier. While the band and fans alike knew that a worthy follow-up to their 1997 instant classic was going to be a daunting task, Blue ended up being something different, unique. Brighter yet darker, a mesh of simple and familiar, but also experimental and edgy. Instead of it being the sound of 4 talented musicians working together, as heard on the first album, Blue was instead the sound of these same 4 talented musicians, but they were all working separately and laying together something that, upon the first few listens, sounded like a somewhat impressive follow-up to a very successful debut. But over the years, Blue would eventually reveal itself to be something more. Songs recorded during a time of frustration, anger, not just one of the last few albums of the millennium, but also the end of an era, all of which brought out each member's best efforts. Where one can argue that Third Eye Blind's debut album had a better collection of songs, another can argue, as seen herein, that Blue had pressure, ambition, depth, flavor, mystery, passion, and ambiguity that still intrigues fans to this very day. To give a little context into what Blue had to follow, the self-titled album went platinum 6 times, and although it was released in April 1997, the record and its singles enjoyed rising sales and airplay well into late 1998, with one of the album's biggest hits, Jumper, having been the album's 5th and final single in late 1998. Ergo, touring to promote their debut album was endless for over 2 years, thanks to the aforementioned Jumper as well as Semi-Charmed Life being smash hits. How's It Going to Be was also a major success, while Losing a Whole Year and Graduate received respectable airplay, and non-single tracks like Motorcycle Drive-By and God of Wine were already becoming underground hits and concert staples in the growing fan base. As these songs were written while frontman and lead vocalist Stephen Jenkins and guitarist Kevin Cadogan were still forming Third Eye Blind, with 10 of the songs being written by the two together and 4 by Jenkins alone, they noted that their follow-up effort would be much more collaborative. Blue's writing process would focus on reworking a couple of demos that were rejected from the first album, mastering new songs that came out of jam sessions prior to taking their work to the recording studio, and would include the writing efforts of bassist Orion Salazar. Even though drummer Brad Hargreaves didn't receive any writing credit, he was still nonetheless much more heavily involved this time around in the creative process, unlike with the first album, in which Hargreaves hadn't officially joined the band until late into the recording sessions. In promoting Blue, Jenkins recounted a pleasant experience of making the album, calling it too much fun and feeling like a complete recording group for the first time. We had these jam sessions that were fun. However, in a 2016 interview with the now-defunct 3eb.co.uk, Jenkins admitted to some of the grimmer stories that had arose after the departure of Cadogan in 2000 and Salazar in 2006. Jenkins cited time restraints, label pressures from Elektra Records, and the isolation between members of the band as causing lots of tension, saying that, "We did Blue in 6 months, we just whipped it out, and there's some things on that album that I am so proud of. But the second album suffered from a kind of coldness almost. That's done in part because we were never in the studio at the same time. Never rehearsed the songs together, never played them together. I did my best to produce that record, and it was very hard to do. Then we succumbed to the time pressures from Elektra to get the album out in 6 months, which we did." While the writing credits of Blue indicate 5 songs that were solely written by Jenkins, that wasn't the result of most of the music being penned by the band's vocalists, but rather a result of a song selection voting system that arose after the recording sessions. The final cut of Blue's tracklist was a major contributor to the internal strife developing between band members during the recording sessions, particularly Jenkins and Cadogan. Having co-founded Third Eye Blind, Cadogan had been under the impression that the band was an equal partnership. When he had found out that Jenkins had taken legal steps to make himself the sole owner of the band, Cadogan became outraged with Jenkins and frustrated by Salazar and Hargreaves' indifference and ignorance to the arrangement. Cadogan had also been informed by the band's manager, Eric Gottlieb, that Jenkins had been taking steps to remove Cadogan from the band completely before any of the songs on Blue were ever recorded. With Jenkins holding all shares of Third Eye Blind, Cadogan set these legal issues aside so that not only could Blue get made, but also so that he could have a shot of staying in the band. For a couple of weeks, Cadogan even had his 3 bandmates plus sound engineer Jason Carmer over to his house to record rough material for ideas on the album. These sessions, albeit difficult due to the tension, successfully triggered enough creative material for the band to go to the studio to record an entire album and then some. However, when it came time to do the actual recording, the band had begun fighting again, resulting in everything that actually ended up appearing on Blue being captured in solitude. Each member came into the studio to record their part of the album alone. In due time, however, they ended up recording over 20 usable songs, more than enough for an LP. When that was accomplished, it was then time to select which of these songs would actually end up on the cut.
'Cause if there's one thing that I can't stand, it's standing next to my fellow man. It's about to break.
The isolation during recording sessions led to a lack of communication about song selection, resulting in further tension within the band. Making matters more complicated was Elektra's disapproval of the controversial Slow Motion, a Jenkins-penned ballad that had been in their repertoire since 1995. Despite Jenkins' insistence that Slow Motion is a satire against violence, the label felt that a song about a student shooting a teacher's son could cause controversy due to the proximity of the Columbine High School massacre, which had happened just months prior. Elektra negotiated with Third Eye Blind over Slow Motion's inclusion, with the label eventually proposing the compromise of an instrumental cut, plus a fully financed EP deal in which the band could include the unedited version of Slow Motion. For Cadogan, however, the idea of a song selection and Elektra's attempt at censorship were just more signs of his co-ownership fading. And to maintain a little bit of control over the situation, Cadogan was the only member to decline Elektra's deal. Whether Elektra intended to make good on their deal, or if they were gambling that Third Eye Blind would just never release this particular EP, the matter of Slow Motion's inclusion on Blue was settled. It would appear as an instrumental, albeit with the chorus vocals still intact for the first pressing. Since band members were having disagreements with not only one another, but now also the label, Gottlieb decided the selection for the remaining songs would be selected by vote, attempting to make it anonymous by setting up a voting system for each member. The selection of 20 plus songs they recorded during Blue's session was listed on a ballot, and Gottlieb instructed each band member to vote for their top 15. When the votes were tallied, a particular 12 had the most votes, ultimately comprising of Blue's final track list. While the selection included a variety, with a fair share being written by Jenkins, Cadogan, and Salazar, the remaining songs that were cut were mostly all songs penned by Cadogan, such as Light That Hits the Room, Lipstick, Gorgeous, Pack a Halo, and Walk with the Devil. Conversely, Cadogan was the sole objector to the tracks Never Let You Go and Deep Inside of You, songs that were penned solely by Jenkins and would go on to be Blue's 2 most successful singles. While Cadogan's selection may have appeared spiteful towards tunes that only Jenkins penned and seemed to be an oversight of some obvious commercial appeal, Cadogan's hunches of what Blue's best track list should be was in line with the taste of a lot of diehard fans. In a 2013 interview with Glide magazine, Cadogan explained, "I feel validated in respect to my efforts to get songs on the album that were either left off or were about to be discarded. For instance, the song Wounded did not have unanimous votes, and I had to do some convincing of Jenkins. The song Gorgeous was discarded from the album, but later became a fan favorite. I've had many people write me and say they include the demo version in their playlists of Blue, and that feels good because it reaffirms to me that I had the right instincts about those songs." 20 years later, it's hard to think of what Blue would be like without successful songs like Never Let You Go to confirm the band wasn't a one-trick pony. On the flip side, it's hard to think of what Blue, or even Third Eye Blind as a whole, would be like without such brilliant songs as Wounded in their catalog. In a lot of ways, it was like Jenkins and Cadogan needed to reaffirm each other's own musical instincts in order to deliver something successful like Never Let You Go, but also something deep and timeless like Wounded. In a lot of ways, it took the two founders to become enemies in order to protect the integrity of their music. Shortly after touring began, Cadogan was fired in January 2000. Tony, Freddie, and Nelly, who had previously played with some of the band members, filled in for the remainder of the Red Summer Sun tour and Dragons and Astronauts tour, eventually becoming a full-time member. Quickly after Cadogan's departure, he began lawsuit proceedings over breach of contract, ending in 2000 with an undisclosed settlement. Cadogan would go on to record rejected tracks from Blue with his next band, Cousin Kevin. Pack a Halo was reworked into Palpitations, and Walk with the Devil turned into Kinsale Harbor, and eventually into Waiting for Me. In 2003, Third Eye Blind would release their third album, Out of the Vein, and first since Cadogan's departure. While fans of Third Eye Blind's first two albums might notice a difference in the musical delivery, which is natural anytime a formula is changed, Out of the Vein was a worthwhile effort nonetheless. Even though the band had replaced a very gifted individual, they held on to what made them true artists. Out of the Vein had just as much passion, effort, pain, and desire to go darker, a willingness to risk narrowing their listenership rather than delivering something brighter for a commercial appeal. Unfortunately, after Ursa Major, the band's fourth album, and the second one with Freddie and Nelly, Cadogan's replacement would ironically face similar power struggles with Jenkins, and, like clockwork, the conflict led to similar firings and lawsuits that following year. Prior to that, Salazar had dropped off the lineup in 2006. Third Eye Blind wasn't as hasty to replace their bassist though, leaving the position open for Salazar if he ever wished to return. He didn't, and in 2011, he reunited with Cadogan to form the band XCB, in which they would perform a mixture of original and Third Eye Blind material. In February 2016, they changed the band name to Cadogan and Salazar, but in October 2016, they reverted back to XCB after finding a permanent lead singer, Tony, Freddie, and Nelly. In 2017, they toured to celebrate the 20-year anniversary of Third Eye Blind's self-titled album. While their songs can never be taken away from Cadogan, Salazar, or Freddie and Nelly, the Third Eye Blind name was taken away from them. Jenkins and Hargreaves continue to record and tour under Third Eye Blind, with many promising releases, most recently Screamer, but the demand at their concerts are still songs from the first two albums. One of the most curious things about Blue is what a third album would have sounded like. If you listen to the jam sessions for Blue and all the material that was cut, it's almost like the final version of the album we got is just a surface, and that there's something deeper underneath. It's no mystery that if the band had settled their differences and stayed together, we would have gotten a completely different third album than what was Out of the Vein, as good as that album is. But what if Jenkins never seized ownership of the band? What if Elektra let them release Slow Motion Uncensored? What if Cadogan hadn't taken the lack of votes of his songs so personally? How different would Blue itself have been? Listening to the demos and jam sessions is almost like going into another dimension where none of the drama happened. It was all about the music, And while the anger and frustration may have driven the passion of what was captured on the record, there was a chemistry between four musicians that had a positive effect on the world only 2.5 years prior.
Every fault that I repent, there's another chip you I've been spent, and you're cashing them all in. Where do we begin to get clean again? Can we get clean again?
But ego, greed, censorship, and an unwillingness to collaborate prevented them from growing together, from evolving. As a result, Blue ends on an ironic yet fitting number, Darwin, a song referencing survival of the fittest, theory of intervention, and other things primal, where things should be multiplying and thriving, to paraphrase the song's very lyrics. The album's catchy final tune actually tempts us to go back to the very beginning, to the opening riff of Losing a Whole Year, their debut's opening track, or even further back to the pre-label demos to hear what we had missed and what might have been.
Multiply and thrive, and the strong survive, and the strong survive.
For later pressings of Blue, Slow Motion was moved to the last track, and hearing a censored ballad penned by Jenkins years prior only makes us want to dig deeper into the past. All pressings contain a hidden track of a guitar solo played by Cadogan that was cut off of the LP's mix of The Red Summer Sun, and its unannounced inclusion at the tail end of the album acts like a poetic farewell from Cadogan to fans. While the album ended up being great, it's difficult to talk about its backstory in a positive light, even 20 years later. The making of and the aftermath of Third Eye Blind's sophomore LP is a sad tale, fitting some of the melancholy lyrics contained within the album. Perhaps Blue is the perfect title.